Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am going to be kicking off a series this summer where we're going to be doing the top 10 champions of every class. This is partly in celebration of reaching 3,000 subs, plus it's the summer, it's a fun thing to do during Alliance War season break and whatnot. So we are going to be starting with the science class today, and I am going to give a slight preamble at the beginning of all of these because basically I started off thinking I was just going to do a top 5 to keep them shorter. But the problem was I looked at those 5 champs and I just felt like so many were missing from my list. So then I expanded it to top 10 and I still looked at it and I was like, man, so many champs are missing it from this list. So my point is that if I went into honorable mentions, I could easily come up with like another 5 to 10 champs per class that you could argue that you believe should be in the top 10, or maybe even me on a different day. If I was preparing this video, I would include them in the top 10. It's just one of those things where it's really hard to do apples against apples. And I did try to very thoughtfully come up with a top 10 list that would both be fun, kind of inclusive of a lot of champs that have different abilities. And with that, we're going to start with the science class, which was maybe the hardest one to do because there's so much overlap and there's so many like old stalwart champions that I didn't include, but some of them I did include. And anyway, I think we should just get into the list. Again, this is a top 10. I'm doing not thinking too hard, just generic use in all the modes, in alliance modes, in battlegrounds, and everything. I'm just trying to take in the whole picture of how does this champ fit into the game? Are they worth ranking up type of questions? And that's how we came up with our top 10. So with that, let's get started with science. And coming in at number 10, we have none other than the OG, Captain America Infinity War. Often thought to be the best science champion in the game for a very long time. The problem is there are just so many new and interesting science champions that have come out since him, and also the definition of the class relationships between science and mystic have changed a little bit. That said, the amount of utility and sort of tankiness and reliability that Captain America Infinity War still has allows him to take champions that are not just mystics. Like, he is a very good generalist for just any type of content. He's been around for a while, so a lot of people are familiar with him. He's easy to play. He's really good for team building. He gets a little bit of a strike because you cannot bring in team members when you do battlegrounds. And also in Alliance War, there are only 3 total slots, so it means you can't use him to his full potential. But everything from, weakness, armor break, petrify, cleansing debuffs off of parry, and then just the really good perfect parries, big damage, passive furies, going to the special 2 if you need to do a big critical hit, going to the special 3 if there's some kind of crit resistance, using the bleed off of the special 1. It's all there. We know how to use this guy. He has still stood the test of time, and he did barely sneak into this top 10 lists. Now, coming in at number 9, a bit of a surprise to me, but when I look at the other people this guy is going up against, I actually think it's correct. And that is Quicksilver. Now, when Quicksilver came out, and I did say this in my video when I went over the 2022 champs, I think he is packed with more utility than any science champion in the entire game. When you look at everything he does, between the slow, which is also a miss counter, when you look at basically not being able to proc dexterity, that gives him pseudo buff immunity, but it also works against the neutralized champs. Obviously the whiplashes and the way that he can do big damage, the wither debuff, which you don't even need to make contact with the opponent in order to charge up, his special 3 rotation, which is an absurd amount of damage if you're using it for long form content. Like, we will definitely see if he's going to be usable in the Abyss in the future, or whatever the sequel to the Abyss is. But the thing with Quicksilver is I hear so often that people don't enjoy his playstyle, that counting the combos is a little difficult to them. And really, on top of it, for me, even though I've gotten pretty used to his combo style, I think it's more just his core loop and the fact that sometimes AI gets a little bit in the way of you watching those whiplash fall off. Now, of course, you can detonate them in smaller batches. It really works. I do really appreciate Quicksilver, and I think some of the best Quicksilver players in the game, like MP Blaze, who has a rank 5 Quicksilver, have proved that he actually deserves to be higher on this list. But when I consider the whole community and the fact that even though he is like a Ferrari, like he can do everything that any science champion would ever want to do in one fight, often you don't have to counter every single part of those aspects. Like, of course, if you're fighting America Chavez, it's amazing to get that wither just so easily. It's almost easier than Spider-Man 2099 because he doesn't start with it without a synergy. You know, it's nice to have the pseudo buff immunity. It's nice to have all those things we talked about. It's very rare where it's like, oh, the entire kit is going to come together and be a perfect counter for this one fight. It's often like overpaying for the utility because there's so much there that you often don't have to access all of it in one fight. Now, he is a really good bursty option. Even if you aren't the most finessed player, it's not that difficult to get a substantial amount of whiplash and just detonate them, and that works as well. I do think because of the skill cap, because of his sort of odd play style and rotation, that's the only reason he's so low on this list. I have mad respect for Quicksilver, and I definitely think there's another universe where I woke up feeling differently and I put him higher in the list. But when you see who the top 8 are, I think, you know, there's a big argument for him to be this low on the list, but nonetheless, he does make top 10 quite easily. Quicksilver, number 9. All right, so number 8 is actually going to be the Overseer. Now, some of you might think that I would put him higher. There's been a lot of Overseer content on my channel recently. He has been my most used war champion, and I think a little bit he was overshadowed, or sort of amplified is probably the better word, by the fact that he was the attack tactic for multiple seasons in a row. He had Subdue, which gave him Neutralize, which is a mystic ability, by the way. And he also had the debuff Detox, which allowed him to take some dangerous fights that he normally wouldn't be able to because of the ability to go debuff immune. And those took what was already a very safe and solid kit for specific matchups, and it broadened his use over the entire Alliance War map. Now, if there's poison, if there's some kind of nullifying, whether it's a champion like Ebony Maw who's trying to nullify off of you, or like the typical Power Snack and Buffet, he is going to just ramp up so quickly, get to so much damage so quickly, and things are going to go great. Now, when he doesn't have the ability to ramp, he's not quite fast enough for, you know, other science champions that would do similar types of things. And he's not immune to Mystic Dispersion, just immune to Nullify. And he does proc his own buffs, like the Fury and the Regen specifically. Obviously, you can avoid the Regen. It's kind of hard to avoid the Fury. And because of that, like, he's not an option for Mojo. And yes, that's just one champion, but Mystic Dispersion is a real problem. One of my only war deaths over the past 2 seasons was against a long shot, and it was just because I couldn't control the power. Now, it was a scary matchup. I could have played it better, but the fact that the buffs on me were sort of feeding Mystic Dispersion definitely did play into it. Now, that's just not even an Achilles heel. That's just a small weakness for him. Again, the reason he's this low is because I do feel like he has his matchups where he's the best. He is generally a fast champion. You know, you can just go into cosmic mode with 3 gamma power and you're probably going to be fine because those light attacks and the retaliation are going to do so much damage. You're probably going to be fine. But it's like, I'm not always going to choose him if it's not the ideal matchup for him, because there are better options as we go up this list. So overall, he is a phenomenal champion. He is very tanky and very safe to play. Even though I did die with him in that long shot, there's obviously no power control. There's only, like, if they gain a lot of power, you gain a lot of gamma, so that's how he deals with power. It doesn't control it, he just ramps from it. But overall, I think there's just better options than him, and as fun and as cool as he is, and as much as I've used him, he's coming in at number 8. All right, now we've got number 7, and this is a champion I do not have ranked, and I am basically going off of all the gameplay that I've seen on YouTube, and that is Titania. Now, there are some phenomenal Titania players out there. Bitter Steel, of course, is sort of one of the most well-known ones. We've seen Vega with the rank 2 taking war bosses, and Vega is new to Titania, and every time we watch him play, he gets better and better. But even when he was learning her for those first few wars that he brought her in, like her kit fits so well together that it really just becomes like she's a great counter for a lot of matchups. And then as you get better at her, she just gets better and better and better. Now she has a lot of debuffs, which means when you run Inequity Mastery, her effective health goes through the roof, makes her very tanky. Plus the effects of the debuffs generally help you throughout the fight. And then really it's the buff immunity. It's just another champ with buff immunity that is just a different play style than Spidey 99. And you know, the main thing with her are those haymakers and knowing when to throw the haymaker, you know, when you can heavy safely, when to go for the special 3. And when you get that sort of sixth sense with her about when to throw that haymaker, I mean, dude, you are indestructible, you're unblockable and unstoppable. There's literally nothing, nobody can do anything to you when you're in that state. And timing it perfectly is a real way to exploit, and I mean that in a positive way, exploit the opponent and just take them down with a ton of damage safely. And just, you know, if you look at the theme of this champion, just this like brute force champion, they did a great job with her design because that haymaker is so unique and interesting in the game. And yeah, that's why she's going to make it all the way up at number 7. Now that she's available as a 7-star, we are going to be seeing a lot of her, and maybe the 7-star stats are amplifying it a little bit, but I think she's great. Even unawakened, she just does a great job, is dependable, and is a phenomenal champion. So she is my number 7. Now here we go, number 6. I'm giving this one to Mr. Negative. And I think there are a lot of really good negative players out there. I've recently been looking at Na, who has a rank 5, and some of the stuff that he's done in War with Mr. Negative, it just makes me believe that he has still got to be in consideration for one of the best Mystic counters in the game for almost all Mystics. Like, there really are very few that he is not a good option for if you know how to play him. I like that it's not buff immunity, it's the nullify immunity plus the ability to get rid of the buffs on him. So it's a different piece of utility, you know, it's not that straight up buff immunity. It's a way to take those buffs and ramp himself up. I love that he does have a petrify, and it's a strong petrify, so that is power control and healing control. And there's 2 ways to finish off your opponent. You can either go for the special 3 with the big burst of red damage all at once, or you can go for the special 2, which ends up doing more damage, but sometimes you can't use the special 2 for one reason or another in the fight. Those degens are just insane. And, you know, there are safe ways to ramp him up so that you're never taking risks. And then, of course, in Battlegrounds, there are risky ways to ramp him up. So the most skilled negative players are, you know, going straight out of block into their heavy charge, getting those evade counters. I just think he is so interesting, man. He is such a good Mystic counter. And, you know, if you really, really get good at him, I think that he will maybe even go higher on this list. But he's able to take so many dangerous fights. Not to mention, like, the Delirium also has like a combat power rate component into it. So like you can very aggressively, after they get the Delirium on them, you can just like hit into them and they're not gaining any power. There's just so much to this guy. I really like Mr. Negative, and he easily makes top 6 for me. Now we're at number 5. And again, these are the tough ones. This is when I was looking at my top 5 and I was like, man, Mr. Negative, Titania, Overseer, they all weren't in my list. I had to expand it to top 10. But for me, number 5, I'm giving it to Spot. And this is a promotion in my mind over the past 6 months. He was a little untested for me, but having used him so often, the only thing that I have to say negative about him is that he is never going to really finish a fight with 100% health. Now, if that's important, you shouldn't use him. But if you want to get the fight over very quickly without doing that many hits, with just doing a very interesting nuking with the special 2 or even the special 1 play style, he is just so cool. Now, he does have a little bit of buff immunity if you need it. I find often that special 2 is just going to kill them and it's not a big deal. You are going to take a little bit of block damage at the beginning of the fight, but then once you get your spots rolling and you hold the portal block, you really don't take that much at all. It means you can very creatively tank some specials into your portal block. It's a little easier said than done, but I have tested it and made it work. And then essentially you get free openings. is you become stun immune, you become completely untouchable, you're putting lots of red damage on the opponent, and then if he's max sig and you know how to hook up everything for that special 2, get the fury by punishing a heavy attack or a special attack, and then make sure that you only throw mediums before throwing that special 2. The special 2 will interact with that sig ability and do extra bursts of damage in addition to the fury, in addition to all the little red rupture icons that you've built up throughout the entire fight. I've been able to one-shot Carl on path 5, basically a rank 5 Carl with one special 2. Like, he goes from 90% health to 0% health in one special 2. To me, the ability to just do that, we knew he was good in Battlegrounds, but the fact that he's that good in War, which to me will also translate into content, I think he is going to be that good, and that's why he's a top 5 champion. He does have a pre-fight that can go to your other champions to give them temporary buff immunity. This would work great for a champion like Captain America Infinity War, who's already doing a parry heavy playstyle. Maybe not so good for Overseer, but for other champs that are close to being buff immune but just need that little edge, he can be good for the team if you need 2 science champions to counter mystics on your team. So I love Spots. This may be a little bit of personal bias, but I have road tested him and have been extremely impressed, and that's why he is my number 5. So now we're getting into the heavy hitters here for sure. At number 4, I'm putting in Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic. Now, if you've never heard of DLL, you better sub to that guy's channel, because he has years and years of Reed Richards content. And I was convinced years ago, but even more, every day I see a new fight being taken by him, I'm even more convinced. He has the Petrify and the Suppression at the start of the fight. The Suppression component of power control is not to be underrated. That means combat power rate. It means the hits you exchange. If you throw in the Petrify Mastery, when you are hitting into stun, you are barely giving them any power. Plus the Petrify is taking care of all the ability power. As he ramps up with mostly just, knocking them down with heavies and throwing special 2s, you can completely shut down fights. He becomes even tankier, and his attack goes up and up and up. He is just a menace on offense. Like, there are very few mystics that can survive him on the war map, but that also translates into content as well. He gets a bad rap for being slow, but he really isn't that slow. Like, a couple special 2s, man, like, they're done. If it even gets to that point. And if it's a long fight, you throw the special 3, you get the passive fury. If you're built up, some mad things are going to happen. And he's just a great support champion as well. So, if you need convincing, I'm not going to spend the rest of this video trying to convince you. He is just one of the great science champions. He stood the test of time. He even got buffed a little bit when he didn't necessarily need it, so he's a little bit easier to play. If you aren't able to land heavies, he's not the best option, but that's one of the only things that limits him. Underrated is his evade when you're blocking. If there's some nasty projectile, you may even get a little bit of an assist from an evade. If not, your resistances are going to be so high that even blocking a big nasty special like a Mangog special 2 or something isn't going to be that scary. So he is so dependable and so good, and easily makes my top 5. I'm putting him at number 4. Coming in at number 3 is Spider-Man 2099. Now, there will always be the eternal debate of Spidey 99 versus Reed. And I've got to give it to Spidey 99 because he's just easier to play. Like, I think he's more accessible to more players. And like, there's this misnomer that the only way to play him is get the Wither up and Dex to keep it paused and then hit their block. That's one way to play him. But for the most part, it's enough to just throw special 2s. When he's Sig 200, you get a lot of combat power rate. It's very easy to get back to that special 2. Weave in heavies every once in a while. Just make sure that you're dexing, or if they're putting buffs on you, it's even better. But yeah, he has just proven time and time again to be such a reliable science champion. And of course, if you want to have a little bit extra fun, throw the anti-venom synergy on, and he's going to just absolutely dominate and shut things down before they even start or get dangerous. It's just a very, very reliable champion. He was really the first Wither champion which is for ability power rate, and he still has probably the strongest and easily accessed Wither. You could argue Quicksilver, but he can't get there without a few dexes. Like if you start with the anti-venom synergy, Spidey 99 is there, or if you can figure out how to get to a special 2, you are shut down for the rest of the fight. And then the other thing is the buff immunity. He was really one of the first meaningful champs to have it, and he's still a go-to for so many matchups, even though there are other buff immune champs now. I also underrated is his exhaustion off of the heavy and his slow off of the special 3. Those do come in handy if it's a longer fight and you need to turn off evade or unstoppable. He can do that, he can keep it up, and it also increases his damage. And then the exhaustion makes him one of the best Sasquatch counters out there. Land one heavy and just keep that exhaustion on them. Sasquatch is never going to build a single rage stack, which means no damage mitigation, no Wrath of Tanarak. He just goes down with the red numbers so easily. Spidey 99 is not just about boss fights from 2 years ago when there was a True Strike node on them. He's still my favorite Mojo counter. He's still one of my favorite long shot counters. He's still one of my favorite America Chavez counters. Like, he just gets the job done in multiple ways and has been so reliable for me as one of my early rank 4s. I love this guy, and he is my number 3 champion. So coming in at number 2, I'm going to have to give this one to Human Torch. Now, Human Torch is a nuke, and he can erase most opponents if he has his pre-fights. The thing is, though, he doesn't always have access to his pre-fight. We're a little spoiled in Battlegrounds with the having the Nova Flame the entire time. So you do have to budget that in, and if the pre-fight's not there, it makes things a little bit more difficult. You have to stay on top of your temperature, but nonetheless, what he does is so tremendous that he definitely is a top 2 champion. You obviously can't use him everywhere if the pre-fight is not available, and really the only thing that kind of stands against him is his lack of power control and that he's a little squishy. He doesn't have a lot of defenses. Often that doesn't matter, because if you're going up against a Mystic, if you get hit a couple times, it just will ramp you up more, and then they'll get more Nova Flames on them. So, you know, at the end of the day, there's a reason that this guy is constantly blacklisted when it comes to Alliance War. It's just because he makes planning a lot easier. The fact that he even exists when it comes to those Mystics, and, you know, even like Nimrod, Professor X, those types of matchups that have a lot of energy damage. He does have a really solid miss counter as well. A lot of people forget about that. And the fact that he has all these power stings, it's just even more damage on top of the Nova Flame. It's amazing. We know what he can do in stuff like the Abyss when he can just continually ramp up. And then in those short fights, they're over before they even start as well. He's self-explanatory. We know what Human Torch can do. He doesn't take a ton of finesse to play, but if you are taking a very difficult matchup, you do need to know what you're doing and not just YOLO. But that's what makes a good champion as well. So yeah, he's definitely a top 2. You could argue he's top 1. I just think kind of what I was talking about before with the older champs, the relationships between Mystics and Science have sort of changed over time. And even though he hard counters Mystics just because of the damage, he doesn't always counter what they're throwing at you. Like if a lot of buffs are getting on you and that's going to lead to some kind of like power gain or degeneration or something like that, he has no way to deal with that unless if he kills them fast enough. Because of that slight blind spot that he has to some of those Mystic problems, that's why he's number 2. But coming in at number 1, we have the man himself, Scorpion. And you might argue like, well, wait a minute, Scorpion, how does he answer all these Mystic problems that you were talking about? Let me just say one phrase to answer that. It's Scorpion doing Scorpion things, my friends. This guy is so extremely powerful. He's got a playbook for so many champions because he can be immune to poison, he can be immune to shock, he can be immune to rupture, which is a little less necessary but still good to have. And then he can change his damage source so that he can do poison damage, or more importantly, he can do energy damage against people that are energy resistant in the negative direction, and he can do the same thing with the ruptures for people who are physical resist in the negative direction. And I've got news for you, man. Wiccan, Ebony Maw, Mojo, there are a lot of champions that have negative physical resistance. Those ruptures are going to be doing a ton of damage. Now, when he first came out, we thought that a lot of fancy things with like holding the heavy needed to happen. Those definitely help, and they look really good in highlight reels. But man, medium, medium, special 2, medium, medium, special 1. That is the formula. The special 2 not only puts a petrify, so if there's any healing, you're going to siphon that back. Even a Sig 21 with willpower healing against you is going to finish with 100% health doing that. But the special 2, it refreshes all the debuffs. You can easily get to like 8 or 10, throw the special 2. Now you have 10 at max duration, all back at 0 on the counter. You get back to that special 1, that puts even more on them. They're just stinging themselves to death. And this is all before you've even thrown on Agent Venom or Venom Synergy, which is, it makes his damage just broken. It is the highest damage in the game, in my opinion. If you are staying on top of the debuffs and you have all those Furies, it's so insane, man. It is so insane. Scorpion is just so freaking good. And like, you do kind of need to know what you're doing, but like also I think it's a lot simpler than a lot of people even think. And he also has really, really good block proficiency, and he's got other synergies that help other great champions like Iceman, for example, Spidey 99. So he is so good for team building, and he just rolls through content. A lot of people have rank 5 Scorpions. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with as a rank 5 for a long time, even into the era of 7 stars, especially with that synergy available. It's just totally nuts. So Scorpion is an easy number 1 for me for all those reasons, and probably some reasons that I also left off. I've always loved playing that guy. I was very early on him. He was one of my first CCP videos, but I've always enjoyed playing him and think he's such a great champ. So anyway, I am sure I left off some champions that you love, and feel free to tell me in the comments, because this is only the first time I'm going to do this. It also means I'm inexperienced in making these videos, so I may have had some oversights, but I did think about this a lot, and I'm pretty happy with this list. We've got a lot more videos like this coming out this month. This is only just the first of 6 classes. Let me know what you think. Who are your favorite science champions? Who did I leave off? And just let me know in the comments. I'd love to chat about it, because it is a very, very interesting topic to me, and it is an imperfect format to do it, but nonetheless, I feel pretty happy about my top 10. Thanks for checking out the video. I will catch you in the next one. Have a great day.